44.6 kilowatts. That will produce about 54,000 kilowatt hours a year. The way it works, the panels on the roof produce direct current. That direct current flows like water through wires, and we'll show you the equipment at the back to inverters. Those inverters convert that direct current to alternating current, which is what we use in our building outlets. And that alternating current then flows out to the grid on a telephone pole that's in the back of the building. From there, once again, like water, those electrons flow wherever the path of least resistance is. So they flow where there's a demand. So that's how distributed generation works. It gets produced here locally and then flows out into the grid. From your perspective, you are now getting net metering credits on your bills. So that's the beauty of the net metering laws in Vermont that allow for a group net metering, a group of you to net meter where the system is remote from your homes, but you get credit directly on your bill. So, we'll walk out and look at the system, but this schematic, the way the main roof looks, and the smaller roof here. For the main roof, we have 3 inverters, and that's what the colors mean, blue, orange, and yellow. And the 4th inverter for that section of the roof, all wired together, coming back into the back of the warehouse into 4 inverters that then go out to the grid. It's fairly easily estimated. However, as you know, the sun shines very differently from day to day and year to year and month to month. So based on changes from year to year, then those estimates can be higher or lower. But on average through the year, the estimates tend to be quite reliable. So I would invite you to all come over here. Take a look at this computer screen. This technology we're using is made SolarEdge. SolarEdge has been very active in the marketplace in the last 3 years. They've kind of taken it by storm because they have a great product. And they're probably dominating 50% of market share right now. The reason for that is that they make what's called a power optimizer. So a power optimizer is hooked up to every panel, has its own device that then communicates with the inverter. And what that means is every panel can operate independently. Unlike the Christmas tree-like dilemma you have when you hook panels in series, if one goes out, they all go out. That same thing can happen with photovoltaics. However, with an optimizer, that doesn't happen. So if you have shading of one panel, it doesn't impact other panels. So unlike solar hot water, where if you have 10% of the panels shaded, then 10% of your production is affected. With a photovoltaic panel, if you have 10% shaded on, say, the bottom of the panel, and 100% of that panel is affected. There are effectively 3 strings in a panel going vertically like that. If you shade one string, that's 1/3 of the panel knocked out. 2 strings, 2/3, 3 strings, all the panel. If you knock out 1/3 of one panel and it's hooked in series with 14 panels, and 1/3 of your production on all 14 panels is affected. So shading matters. One relates to monitoring, what we can see every day, every week, every month. So this is a web portal, so we just access it online. Here's production in the month of June. So each day's production in watt hours, like that. And on the bottom here, there's our monthly forecast. There's the actual production. So if we go back to April. And so there's the 9th of April when we turned the system on and it operated through the 30th. That's a pretty good month. As you can see from all those high bars, there aren't any low bars. If we jump to month of May, it's a little different. Many more lower bars. And so if we look at production, here are the numbers I just quoted. There's 4.2 megawatt hours in the month of April versus an estimate of 4.1, and there's 4.8 in the month of May versus 4.8 estimated. So, however, what's neat about SolarEdge, you can then look at the layout. There's the layout on our roofs. There's the large roof section, there's the small roof section. And then we can blow it up. We can look at individual panels. This roof here is more easterly facing, and this roof here is more westerly facing. So the easterly facing roof this morning is getting good sunshine, and the westerly roof will get it this afternoon. So, in a perfect world, solar would like to be 180 degrees due south. In a perfect world, it would like to be 35 degrees in pitch at our latitude here. However, there are good designs that are more easterly facing or westerly facing. And typically with a tilt, you want to go with the roof tilt that you have. You don't want to try to rack it up to a different angle on a roof. And so what we see here, this light blue color is signifying the highest production this morning, and the dark color is signifying the lowest. So that should call your attention to it to say, do you have an issue or not? And it's interesting that if you look at this roof here, we have a radio tower right out here with a microwave frame on it. So in the early morning, there's a little shade that comes from that. And it casts over these lower panels here. So
yeah.
see that production is 372 on that panel, 347 there. First, 461 in the upper corner that has no shading. So that's exactly the way it should be working. And that's where SolarEdge is really benefiting us, because it's not impacting those other panels. That's a string, that's a string, and that's a string. There are two strings there. So each panel is working independently. Now what's interesting is if we thought there was a problem there, we could right click on that panel, we could choose chart. And look at the energy. And this would chart for us the production of that panel for every day. And we could compare it to other panels. This will tell us the amount of power that it's currently produced. Or its power during any hour of the day, its voltage, its current. It tells us a great deal of information about that. We can look at the system overall, we can look at each inverter, we can look at each string, and we can look at each panel. That's very powerful. We have many systems out there that were blind to all those things. So it used to be that was very much a luxury, but now it's become cost effective to use this technology to do this kind of thing.
So would you get an alert or something if for any reason one panel just seemed to go black?
We do get email alerts. They're not always perfect, and sometimes you can get nuisance alerts that you kind of get used to, and you might look at it and say, no, I don't think that's a problem. And then it has to occur for a day or two before you say, that is out of the normal. One problem is you get communication notifications that the internet has gone down, and so we don't know if the customer has unplugged the router or if it's really an issue. So oftentimes we'll call up and say, have you unplugged your router, has anything changed? So in any event, let me show you just a couple of days. And so here we are this morning, and it's about 10 minutes of 10, so 10 o'clock hasn't boarded yet. Up to 9 o'clock, there's where inverter number 1 was. Inverter number 1 is on this big roof. Now I'm going to pick inverter number 4 and do the same thing. That's on this roof. And so inverter number 4 has risen more quickly at a steeper angle, but particularly in the very early light. And that's because of its easterly facing position. And so there you see it for a whole day yesterday. And so the solar production curve is skewed to the earlier part of the day, and this roof is skewed to the later part of the day. But they're both basically following the same pattern. And so the area under the curve is the amount of energy you're producing. And that tells us that it's basically doing just what we would expect it to be doing. So there are lots of bells and whistles with the monitoring that, as technicians, we very much appreciate that because it gives us great latitude to figure out what's going on and keep track of things. Oh, that's all I was going to say about monitoring. Any questions about any of that? And then I would just say, by way of a couple final remarks, I don't know how many I know some of you are keyed into what's gone on at the legislature this year with solar siting. It's been quite controversial. A bill was created to give communities more say in how solar gets sited, which is good. Unfortunately, the bill didn't get crafted very well. Special interests were all trying to get their way, and so the governor vetoed it. And then the legislature came back into session and recrafted the bill to deal with some technical issues that were created. That got passed. We have a solar siting bill. It's a much better bill than what was originally approved. But what that highlights is that solar has become, the pendulum has swung to the other side. Back in 08 and 09 and 10, solar was really everything about solar was viewed very positively. The legislature was very willing to give incentives and create legislation to make it more easily permitted and so forth. All that has shifted now, and the sentiment in the legislature is quite a bit of anti-solar sentiment, and that's because of the hockey stick. Solar has grown at a very rapid rate. In 08, the net metering cap was 2% of net power required. Then that grew to 4% in 2010. And by 2013, then the cap was raised to 15%. And it was believed that would be, that we wouldn't hit that cap until 2017. Well, we hit that cap in November of 2015. And that was because larger projects, it wasn't small projects, it wasn't residential projects, it was larger projects came in, grew very rapidly. Outside development communities saw Vermont as a very lucrative place to develop solar. So that caused a fair amount of angst in the communities about where these things were sited and what they looked like and where the economic benefits were going out of state. So, and another thing that's occurred is that the utilities have been pushing back. And utilities think that solar has too rich a benefit package, and the utilities would like to control the ownership of solar going forward. So utility companies would like to see smaller solar projects done and larger projects to be owned by the utilities or a group that they're affiliated with. So there are a lot of special interests in play now. So So 2017 proves to be a challenging year. Solar will not grow at the pace that it's been growing. The economic benefits will be watered down, but permit processes will take longer. That's the new reality. So I want to mention those things. We're not happy about that, but we recognize that there needs to be a balance of all interest in these things.
Does that mean that the new legislative requirements that for each solar installation, we've now got to go through the sluggish town planning process to get permission to put solar panels up?
Oh, gee.
That's one of the
So
things
much
that's gonna
more.
change. And I mean, really, the pendulum had swung to the opposite direction. Solar had a free range to do whatever it so chose
So it's actually making
previously.
it harder in Brattleboro than most towns.
It is. It is. That's gonna be the reality.
Is it gonna make it harder for bigger, or say rooftop, personal installations? It's gonna be harder even for that?
So 15 kilowatt and small projects will not be harder. So the small residential transactions are basically left untouched, which is good. However, that's a very small segment of the market. So it's the 150 kilowatt and 500 kilowatt projects that are in play. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to encourage them to be located where the load is. So if you're a manufacturer, they'd love to have you put it on your roof, where those electrons are flowing into your business. What they don't want to do is locate a large project in the Northeast Kingdom and ship those electrons to White River Junction to be absorbed. So they'd like to be close to the load. They'd like to be on rooftops, existing structures. They'd like to not be on prime ag soils. So they don't want them in open fields and on ag soils. Those are some of the criteria that are being bantered about in terms of changes for 2017. So I guess I would encourage you all, I thank you all for what you've done to make this step towards solar. I would encourage you to stay engaged and make yourself heard as to where policy goes forward, because it's going to be challenging. We're going to have to work very hard to continue to foster solar growth. So with that, once again, any further questions about what we've got here or comments?
So I'm just, if I hear this right, you're talking about the bigger projects are going to have a harder time than things like this, like a community solar that is a larger kilowatt will be more difficult.
One of the projects that, this project could have been done after November if we had gone ahead and gotten a permit for it prior to hitting the net metering cap. So even a project like this could be more difficult to be developed.
Yeah, it's
The-
unfortunate.
The only project that's come out of this unscathed is the 15 kilowatt smaller project. Community solar with the original rules that were drafted by the Public Service Board, community solar was essentially cut out of the equation, much to everyone's shock. Because community solar really is it's the way to go.
Yeah.
It's the thing that makes the most sense from a societal benefit standpoint.
Right.
So communities, it won't be cut out of the equation. It will happen. However, it's the details of that are yet to be finalized.
Because I mean, we had people come look at our orientation and everything, and it was just totally wrong.
That's right.
And we have friends, the same thing, is too much shade, too many, who want to do solar for the benefit of the environment, and this was perfect.
That's right.
You know.
It makes sense from an economy of scale standpoint. If done properly, it's the best way for society to address that demand. But,
How many participants are there in this project?
so we have 10. We have 7 in the first phase and 3 in the other roof. So
We're
that's-
pioneers.
Well, elsewhere, there are companies that are doing community solar at very large scale. So when the gap was hit, Uncommon, which is the solar company up north, they got their funding from the Ben and Jerry's folks, so they're very well capitalized. They had 7.5 megawatts worth of projects in the queue, and all those projects were 150 kilowatts. So they had a phenomenal number of projects that were all queued up for community solar, and they have no problem subscribing these projects. It's getting them designed and permitted that's the challenge.
Now, were these?
And all those were put on hold subject to rule changes that are going on. So unfortunately, that's the direction we should be going in, community solar. But unfortunately, that put a stop to all of that. And the Public Service Board hasn't acted on these matters in 6 months.
Now, were these intended to be for Vermont subscribers, not being sent down to
That's right,
New York State?
that's right.
Yeah, they were all Vermont
They
subscribers.
all have to be
Because that was
within
the
the
initial issue, was that big companies were coming in from out of state and sending
Sending
power
elsewhere.
out of state, right, wasn't it?
Well, not that they're sending power out of state.
Oh, okay.
So one issue is big companies were coming in and sending money out of state.
Ah,
So they were bringing a workforce in to build those projects from out of state. And so the economic benefits were going elsewhere.
So what else is
Another
new?
controversial, that's right, another controversial matter was renewable energy certificates. Each project has a bundle of attributes attached to it called renewable energy certificates. This project has renewable energy certificates. And so you could take those and you could sell them in the marketplace. Because the utility companies have to develop a certain amount of renewable energy each year. It's based on a renewable portfolio standard, so they have to invest a certain amount into that. They can satisfy that by building solar projects, investing in hydro or wind, or they can buy renewable energy certificates.
Oh,
And so if this project, for instance, sold its renewable energy certificates out of state, because there isn't a market here, if they were sold in Massachusetts, then a Massachusetts utility would get a pass on having to offset its pollution from its own power plants, and they would get the benefit of this project. And so what solar developers were doing is they were selling RECs, and they were doing this all quietly. And what that does is it means that you can no longer promote this project as green or sustainable or renewable, because all those benefits have gone to someone else.
Oh dear.
And so your project, we've retired the RECs, but the RECs can have substantial value to sell in the marketplace. Most projects in Vermont were not retiring the RECs. So a professor by the name of Kevin Jones at Vermont Law School got onto this a couple of years ago and brought a suit against Green Mountain Power, because Green Mountain Power was the greatest offender. They were making $50 million a year in REC sales. And then they were turning around and reporting to the Shumlin administration that they were doing all this great stuff with solar projects to achieve the 90% renewable by 2050 objective, which is the state's goal. Well, that's double dipping. And so for those projects that were sold, they could not promote those So Kevin Jones brought this to light. Green Mountain Power stopped that practice. The legislature took action to prevent that from happening. And so this is all come to the forefront, and these practices are being corrected. But that was the nature of the hockey stick. We went through a very rapid growth period. There was a lot to be learned and a lot to be understood. And we're a lot smarter about that today than we were 3 years ago. And so our challenge going forward is going to be to continue on a rapid growth curve with renewables, but do it in a manner that isn't abusive in that sort of way and respects the environment and individual rights and community in the process.
And the credits are now staying within, essentially here, for this project.
So these credits are retired. They won't be sold.
Right.
It's an interesting discussion because in theory, we haven't given them to anyone or burned up a certificate or any such thing. Renewable energy certificates are created each year based on the number of megawatt hours that you produce in power. As long as there's a market, then you can sell those certificates each year in the marketplace. So they don't go away. So the discussion in Vermont is the legislature now has required that the utilities, if they receive the RECs pledged by a project, they have to retire them. They can't sell them. So the only safeguard method there is today to make sure that RECs get retired is really to give them to the utility. It's being discussed, well, why can't the individual project owner hold on to them and retire them themselves and have that go towards the state objective of 90% by 2050? And that's being looked at to see what the right system is. So it hasn't been determined yet. So in the meantime, we're just committing with this project not to sell the RECs and to retire them. And if the day comes when we can make that official with some sort of document, then we'll do that. But that's our clear intention. All right, so Glenn Letourneau is our lead PV installer and technician, and Glenn knows more about PV than most people in Vermont, and has been doing it a long time. Glenn is here today and is happy to, with a solar panel in the yard, show you firsthand how the photovoltaic effect works and how that produces power and how light conditions change that, the tilt, the angle, and so forth.
What we're doing right here right now is we're just trying to show how various sunlight conditions affect a solar panel. What I'll show you here is how much different sunlight levels and sun angles impact a solar panel. And so currently we're not directly facing the sun, we're not at a 90-degree angle perpendicular, but we're producing about, well, the panel is generating about 6.2 amps of potential current. So right now this panel is in what's called short circuit current because we have the module short circuited to itself, which is a pretty cool thing that's unique to photovoltaics. Can't do that with too many other electrical things or they blow up. But so what we're trying to show you is that this angle to the sunlight very much matters. So as you can see right here, right now on this meter, in short circuit current, we have about 6.3 amps. But then if we take this panel and we angle it towards the sun, all of a sudden we jump up to almost 8 amps. We have 7.88 amps right now. And if we were to further turn it, it would probably get even better. Yeah, I guess it's staying at around 7, 8. But so the angle of the module very much matters. So if you have your solar panel and you put it on the west side or the east side of a roof, it's not quite as good as if you can get it perfectly solar south. But that said, as you can clearly see when we're facing more to the west right now, it's still producing quite a bit of potential current. So yeah, if we take this same orientation and we put something over it to shade the module to simulate either leaf debris or a branch that's putting some shade over the panel, then you can see that that too affects the output of the solar panel. If we shade the panel, and depending on how the panel is being shaded, we can lose quite a bit of current. So right here with my arm shading the top of this, we've lost about 1/3 of the potential current that was able to be produced. So if I unshade that and we take the paper off, it jumps back up to 6.5 amps versus shading these, and we go down, now we're down to half of that, 3.2 amps. So shading is very important, and depending on where your shade is on the module, it can affect it more or less. So sometimes if something is, say, if something is shading a spot on the panel, and my hand doesn't take up a very large portion of this solar panel, but it just cut half of the production of this panel, I take my hand away, it jumps to 6.5 amps, put my hand back on there, and it drops down to 3.4 amps. Now, just with that, even though we have a good 80% of this panel exposed, we're only producing 0.5 amp right now, because we've covered up the PN junctions, the positive negative junctions, where all of that current cascades and where all the diodes live up in the top of the panel. So we're shading 10% of the module, and we've lost, well, about 85–90% of potential production. So it's very important. If we take this same shade and we put it down the side of this module, so now we're back up to 6.5, but if we shade just that side, same amount of shading on the panel, but in a different orientation, we're still producing 6.5 amps. Show you the meter there. So now we're at 6.6, and if you take that away, the meter barely moves.
And why is that?
It's a function of the way that the panel is constructed. So each of these strings, there are these junctions, and so this panel is actually, this one solar module is actually like 3 panels embedded in one. So each of these sections of 2 solar panels here is kind of like a panel inside of the glass. So up here, it starts at the bottom, comes up, comes across here, goes back down, and you can see down there it'll connect, come back up, and go down, and it creates this sort of serpentine connection where it's paralleled at the top and the bottom and series throughout the panel. So if you shade the top, this is where you're behind these 2 cells here is where there's the junction box with the output connectors. And so if you shade that area, you're kind of, it's like you're creating a high resistance in this area where the current wants to go, and so it's harder for that current to get there. So whereas if you just block this one side, then you still have this whole free path for the current to sort of bypass, because there are what's called bypass diodes.
Because these are hooked in parallel versus series across the top and parallel.
It's both inside the module. So
Okay.
you've got these strips here which are run in series, and then the 3 are put in parallel with each other.
Okay. Now what happens if you shade the bottom? Is it different?
So it should be different. So if you just did the same thing we did on the top with the bottom. So we're starting with 6.8 amps. We shade the entire bottom. It's a little better than it was when we shaded the top, but it's quite similar. So now we're dropping down to 0.5. The sunlight is constantly changing here as well.
But still,
it's roughly the same, because
same.
you're effectively shading each of these 3.
Okay. So it doesn't matter top or bottom. It matters whether you're doing horizontal or vertical.
Or vertical, and how far that cuts across the panel.
So if you have a leaf shading that sort of
if you
does
have a
it
leaf,
diagonal,
If you have a leaf that's like in this top corner,
Yeah,
then it's probably not going to reduce it by too much.
Yeah.
But if you have a branch that comes out across and it cuts into all three of these, then
Yeah.
it's going to impact it significantly more.
okay. And these are the panels that are on,
So these,
yes, that are on the roof.
Let's describe that one other way. So, this panel is made up of 60 cells.
Yes,
There are 10 cells here
yep,
and 6 cells here.
yep,
And 20 of these cells are strung together like Christmas tree lights
okay,
in series.
yep,
20 more and 20 more.
yep,
The panels that are on this roof are
72 cells.
72 cell panels.
okay.
Same concept, just more
Okay.
cells.
Same concept.
And that the instrument the diode thing you showed earlier helps compensate,
The optimizer.
optimize, sort of separates to get the maximum out of
So
the cells
with
that
a
the sun
typical-
is actually shining on, rather than being influenced by sun.
with a
And so
typical
that's interesting that you bring that up, because what that optimizer addresses is the same phenomena, but it's from one panel to another.
Oh, okay.
What that optimizer
Oh.
doesn't do,
Okay.
and in theory you could do,
Oh,
you could have an
within a
optimizer
within a panel.
within a panel. You'd
Ah.
have 3 optimizers
Oh,
here
okay.
in theory.
Yep.
They're not designed in that manner, but that may be a technology we'll see in the future.
In a sense,
So-
on
so-
a much more basic level, that's kind of what the bypass diodes do, because there are 3 bypass diodes in these in this module, one for each of these 3 sections. So when just one of them gets shaded, that bypass diode opens up and creates a less restrictive path for the voltage and current to go through.
Ah.
So that way, that helps. It's so that you don't have that Christmas tree effect where this much shading can cut out the whole panel.
Oh, okay.
But with those optimizers, as opposed to the older style string inverters, what those allow you to do is those allow you to operate a high voltage DC inverter in a similar fashion to what are called AC modules or microinverters. So with those, it's every single module has its own individual, even when they're connected in series, every module is different than the one next to it. So they all have their own what's called a maximum power point on a voltage current graph, on an IV curve, and that gives you, under various light and temperature conditions, what the maximum that this panel could produce. So when you put them all in series on a traditional string inverter, then that shading impacts the whole string. Whereas when you put them with these power optimizers or with AC microinverters or AC modules, then you have every individual module contributing the maximum power that it can to an aggregate, so that you get the maximum power out of the whole array as opposed to the maximum power out of a string based on the shading of, you know, 1 module or 2 modules of 13 or however many you have on the roof. This basically just, those power optimizers act like those bypass diodes, but for the entire array. So it makes the system much more efficient. You can harvest a lot more energy, and you have a much more diverse area of places where you can put solar that traditionally you'd say, I can't do this because half of the roof is shaded most of the time. But,
So,
yeah.
what that highlights for me is that then it's in whoever you go with, if you're going to do solar, it's important to know how they're handling these issues.
Absolutely.
Because when we originally started with solar, we knew shading some made a difference, but now as they're more sophisticated, you really want to know the kind of panels, how they do it, and if even if you have an aggregate of like 10 on your roof, again,
How
you
they're
deal
working
with
together, that's right.
potential partial
Absolutely.
shading.
Unfortunately,
As well as other issues that may be different from installer or to installer.
Yeah, it's very important to understand what the installer of your solar system is going to use for equipment and to actually know how that equipment works, because unfortunately not all solar equipment is created equally, and you can have some very good string inverters that work excellent under perfect, horizon to horizon exposure where there's no shading, and under certain circumstances that might make financial sense, like again where you have no shading at all. But if you get more complicated sites, then that same inverter, although you might pay a little bit more up front for the extra equipment that you're going to get with these optimizers and an inverter, you're going to get much more return on investment because you're going to generate more power for those more complicated sites. So if you have shade, then it makes sense to use an inverter that addresses that and to use an installer that understands the complexities of your individual site and takes that into consideration for the design.
Great.
All right, so let's do one more thing. Kim.
Yes.
Come over and look at the back of the panel. And so look at this, Kip.
All right.
And so can you read this from there?
Yes, okay.
All right, so let's talk about the nameplate, Glenn, what that means and how it relates to the 215 watts.
Sure.
And your reading.
Okay. So a typical solar panel, when you get it out of the factory, it will have what's called a nameplate on it. And what this does is this tells you some basic information about this module. For instance, at the top here, it gives you the manufacturer and a serial number and a model number. And then it gives you some electrical characteristics about what this panel is going to produce, or at least what it produced at the factory under what it's called standard testing conditions.
Yes.
So at standard test conditions, which is 1,000 watts per meter squared with a 1.5 air mass and at 25 degrees Celsius, which is 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Those conditions rarely exist in the real world for very long, so this is good for designing a system and for being able to understand what your system is doing. It gives you a baseline.
And to compare across systems.
Exactly. But for the most part, this information is never going to be what you're actually producing. But that said, it's still important to know. So the major things that it normally tells you on the back of the module is what the wattage of the module is coming out of the factory. So this is a 215 watt module. It gives you what's called the short circuit current, which is what we've been looking at here on our meter, because again, the module is short circuited to itself. By the way, never open these if you're in the sunlight after you've connected them together. So you can draw an electrical arc.
Oh.
And you don't want that. It can hurt you or damage the collector. So then what it gives you is what's called the open circuit voltage. And what the open circuit voltage is when this panel is exposed to sunlight, if it weren't shorted to itself, then it creates a certain amount of voltage. And that voltage is typically a certain percentage higher than it is under load. And that's very important when you're designing for both hot and cold temperatures, because temperature very much affects the voltage of a solar module. So if the temperature gets colder, you get higher voltage. When the temperature gets hotter, your voltage goes down. And so your installer needs to understand these things in order to design your system so that way in the height of the summer, when it's really hot, your inverter is getting enough voltage still to operate. And in the winter, you don't get too much voltage to damage your equipment.
So people who are installing up in the Northeast here are going to use different equipment than those who are installing in Southern California or Arizona.
Exactly. So even people who are installing here in southern Vermont are potentially going to have different design characteristics than people that are designing in even like Hartford, Connecticut. Because
or the Northeast Kingdom.
Yeah, or even from here, from Brattleboro to the Northeast Kingdom as you get closer to the Canadian border. I mean, we have like 130, 140 degree temperature swing potential from around minus 30, minus 40 degrees as a worst case scenario extreme in the wintertime to 110 degrees or more in the summertime. So, and of course the modules, if it's 110 degrees out and bright sun, the cells are even significantly hotter than that. So it's not so much the ambient temperature that affects the cells as the cell temperature itself.
Yes. Okay.
So,
Oh, talk about the rating of the panel, Glenn.
yep.
That's powerful.
So the two main things that you're gonna basically look at is gonna be your rated voltage and your rated current. So if you take the rated voltage here, 28.2 volts, and you multiply that by the rated current, 7.7 amps, you get 217 watts. I know this says 215, but there are individual tolerances, plus or minus a couple percent for every module coming out of the factory, because given the nature of silicon, they're all slightly different. So that's a very important thing. That basically tells you that at that theoretical 1,000 watts per meter squared with 1.5 air mass and 77 degrees Fahrenheit or 25 degrees Celsius, you're going to get about 217 watts of power out of this module. Again, that's not a condition that will exist for a long time, but that's just how they have to test them so that you can have a common denominator to judge all panels.
And
So here we are today. It's about 12 noon. It's actually about 11:18, and we have a beautiful blue sky day. So our light conditions are probably not that far off from 1,000 watts per meter squared.
So what we've done now is we have added a calibrated solar cell to give us an actual irradiance value, so we know exactly of that standard test conditions, the hypothetical 1,000 watts per meter squared. We know, given the tilt angle of the panel and numerous other factors, we know exactly how much watts per square meter we should be getting on this panel. So this gives us another point of data to be able to judge how this panel would be performing. So
right now I've got a reading of 436 watts per meter squared.
So at vertical, at a 90 degree pitch, so only about half of theoretical standard test condition potential, a little less. And so our current is at 4.7 amps. So if we tilt this module down, now that we're actually in the angle of the sun, and if we get it to roughly somewhere in the probably 40 degree pitch, now we're up to 8.8 amps. And what do we got for
1,025.
So, and we have actually greater than standard test conditions. We have 1,025 watts per meter squared. So, which makes sense because this panel on the back says its short circuit current is only 8.3 amps and we're at 8.7 right now. So we have above STC conditions, and could also be a factor that this unit hasn't been out in the sun for very long and it has a temperature sensor in it, and these cells are not nearly as hot as this is from sitting out here for a while. Yeah, and this has both a monocrystalline cell and a polycrystalline cell, so it's sort of taking a judgment between the two. Yeah, so there's a lot of factors, and again so like the roof here at ISA where we have these power optimizers.
Yeah.
Again, if we had say 5 of these exact same panels sitting side by side here with their own meters on them, they would all probably say something different, because coming out of the factory, even if they're all, if they were all REC 215 watt modules, same exact model, same exact run, they could have been made the same exact time, they still may end up producing, plus or minus up to 3 to 6% more than the one next to them. And unfortunately, like the old adage says, it's only as strong as the weakest link in the chain. If you have a traditional string inverter and you have a string of, say, 10 modules, and one of them is operating at that theoretical 215 watts, and then the rest of them could operate at, say, 220 watts, that little one that's operating at 215 is going to drag the rest of them down. The technology has come along amazingly in the past, well, I guess that would be 20 plus years now, 25 years.
Yeah.
But now we can take all of those modules and we can put them side by side, and this module can produce its maximum power point under the given sunlight and temperature conditions, and so can the one next to it, and the one next to it, and the one next to that. So we get high voltage DC strings which operate like microinverters, but with a higher degree of efficiency. And yeah, so it's an interesting technology.
Yeah. And my understanding is that the the panels and the silicon itself they've developed so it's more efficient than it was 25 years ago.
Absolutely.
In terms of percentage.
This module right here,
Yeah.
this is a pretty standard size. If we were to measure this module, you'd see that it's about 39 inches wide and about 65, 66 inches tall.
That was about the size of the panels we got in 2004.
So we have modules right now that we're putting up. So again, this is 215 watts that are this same size that are 285 watts. So
okay.
I think the 300 ones are a little bigger. I think they're a little taller. But the 285 watts out of the same physical platform. So yeah, the efficiency is constantly being improved, and people are finding ways to do better with, to make these things cheaper. And of course, it remains to be seen whether that will be a good thing 20 years down the road. But they all have 25-year warranties, so.
Yeah.
Efficiency is measured based on square footage.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the efficiency of this panel would have been in the 14 or 14.5% range, and the efficiency of those panels is in the 16.5 to 17% range.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That was pretty typical even just 10 years ago, where 12% was for a monocrystalline or a polycrystalline was pretty much the standard. You had some that would get up into the 16, but those were the more high efficient, like the Sanyo modules and things like that, or Sun Powers, and then in amorphous silicon, when and where you see that, is even less efficient.
Yep.
But it's usually less expensive. So if space isn't a premium, then that.
Now the amorphous is what they, when they sort of make solar roofs, isn't that something that can be basically sprayed on, applied to a metal base?
I'm not sure how the solar paint really works. I mean, I would assume that must be some sort of like an amorphous technology, but I was thinking more of that they don't exist anymore, but unisolar. The problem with amorphous solar is that, and pretty much every manufacturer of amorphous solar has had this problem, is that because of the nature of the way that it's made, it tends to break down a lot faster in direct sunlight, which is very unfortunate for something you want to put in direct sunlight to generate power. Unisolar and various other amorphous silicon manufacturers had big problems with preventing that breakdown, whereas the polycrystalline, which you see here, I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but you get this nice, I think it's a rather pretty sort of a patchwork, like an all blue tie-dyed coloration, versus the monocrystalline, you just see like just all solid dark blue, or even to a blackish color.
Yes, the camera does pick it up.
Okay, great. These don't break down nearly as quickly, so that's why some of these modules that were produced quite a long time ago, more than 25, 30 years ago, they still generate quite a bit of power. And of course, it's going to be less than when they were originally manufactured, but they still work. And so I've seen some solar panels that are greater than 30 years old that are still producing power.
Some of the ones in Marlboro now, when we sold the house, but have passed their warranty period.
Yep. And that's how the warranties really got started with companies like Kyocera and various other solar manufacturers. What they did is they originally put out a warranty. It was like 8 years or something like that. And then when they got to 8 years of having that panel actually producing, they said, okay, well, we can extend it. So we get to 10 years, okay, it's a 10-year warranty, and then they eventually got to 15 and 20. And so 25 has kind of become the standard warranty that you'll see on most solar modules. There are some out there that have 30, I've seen now. But so 25 is kind of a standard warranty for a polycrystalline or a monocrystalline solar cell. And it's important to note that warranty is a power production guarantee, not exactly a physical warranty on the module. I'm not entirely sure how that works.
The workmanship is
But
10 years.
Yeah, so the workmanship,
Oh, I see.
they say is 10 years.
You know, if like the frame started,
That's right.
or the aluminum started
Yeah,
anodizing, or
That's right.
I'm not sure
Huh.
how that would work out in practice, because if your frame starts coming apart and you can get
yeah,
moisture to get inside the glass,
gonna change the output.
it's going to damage the panel and affect the power production. But so I typically think of it as just the panel has a 25-year warranty, and as long as the company still exists, then you're probably good. So that's why it's very important to buy solar panels from a reputable company, from somebody that has either been around for a while or somebody who has been tested and been shown to use the highest quality practices in their manufacturing. REC is consistently very highly graded. There are many others out there who are as well. Kyocera is another one, Japanese company.
yep. I forget what.
but-
Siemens were what I had.
Yeah, I'm not sure about where they fall in the
They still make
in the
them.
category. I don't even know. Just typically, we have a very limited group of solar panels that we use here because we try to use the highest quality modules that we can.
Right.
And so we trust REC. For most of the 8 years, or almost 8 years that I've been here with Integrated Solar, we've been installing RECs. We've done a few different brands when we've been subcontracted to do larger groups, or you know, in the beginning we were trying a bunch of different modules to find out what we liked. But
Yeah,
pretty
yeah.
much for the last, I'd say probably 6 years, we've almost exclusively installed RECs.
And where are they made?
So RECs,
Where are they manufactured?
they're manufactured in the United States. The company is, you'll have to forgive me, it's one of those more Nordic companies. Is it Sweden or Switzerland or Scandinavia?
Yeah.
So it's one of those.
However, truthfully, now they're Chinese. They've been bought out
They
by
were
the
bought
Chinese.
out. Okay, so see, it's constantly in flux.
Yeah. But
But eventually,
the factories are in the United States in any case.
No,
No.
no, this
REC?
factory is in the east.
is it now? Because I
Yeah.
thought it used to be Georgia.
Yeah, no.
Hmm.
No, they harvest their silicone in Washington State, but the
Oh, okay.
manufacturer
Okay.
Yeah.
is in Indonesia.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, so disregard everything I just said.
Well, and I know the way world trade is these days. Things shift a lot.
Well, in the solar world, you can't avoid that. Of the top 10 manufacturers in the world, 8 are Chinese.
Yeah.
So,
And probably next year it'll be 9.
that's right.
That said, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
No?
I mean, it's not necessarily a great thing because we like to keep things as close to home as we can for both economic and environmental reasons. But China's come a long way with the modules that they make. There were some modules that they made in the earlier years which really were not good, and there was a lot of failures and a lot of problems. But there's a lot of Chinese products, both solar modules and solar inverters and other solar equipment that's now top-notch equipment that can compete with just about any other manufacturer from the U.S. or Germany or Japan.
And they're starting to use now much more. So they're looking at their own country as a market.
Absolutely, yeah, and looking at places outside of America,
Yeah.
you know, other parts of Europe and the Asian world, totally, and developing countries, South America, Africa.
Yeah.
So, solar only has a very bright future.
Yeah.
To make a bit of a pun there.
Yeah. I think I'll end it there. Thank you.